Okay, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and good night, depending on where in the world you might be at the moment. You've tuned in, as it were, for the fourth module of our free short course, the Cisco CyberOPS short course, with Matt Constable as our mentor tonight. So, as always, we will keep the lines open just for about 3 to 5 minutes while people file in and get themselves all prepared. In the meantime, the chat's there. Say good morning. Tell us where you're from. Tell us what your day is like. If you've been up to anything special. And we will just all go a little bit quiet for the next 3 or 4 minutes. But welcome, especially to everybody from all around the world. I can see people from North Carolina, USA, from Perth, where it's been 40 degrees the whole last week, I believe, and down here in Melbourne, where it's been 20 degrees, of course, because that's how Melbourne operates. Speak soon. Okay. Again, I wish everyone a very good morning and good evening and good night and all sorts of other times. Because we've got people from just about every time zone in the world, from Zambia, Nigeria, from Melbourne, from the US, all over the place. Welcome again to the Cisco CyberOps short course presented by Charles Sturt University, or in fact, presented by IT Masters on behalf of Charles Sturt University. This short course is over 4 weeks, and this is the fourth week. We're talking about types of attacks and vulnerabilities tonight. First up, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the people of the land from which we are broadcasting, the Wurundjeri people here in Melbourne, or NAM as it's known, and I'd like to pay my respects to all their elders, past, present, and emerging. A little bit of homework, housework, I should say, before we continue. Remember to send your messages to everyone. I'm sure everybody here is probably right down with the gist of it now. And put your questions that you would like Matt to answer in more detail into the Q&A session so that we can tell them apart, because the chat does flash by very fast at times. I hope you're all safe and well and looking forward to it. And I think really it's time to get Matt going. I'm sure you've all heard him before. So welcome, Matt, and how are you tonight?
Thank you, Shane. Very well, thank you. And welcome to everyone who is either first time joining into our 4-week short course on the last week, or to those of you that are returning. So this evening, in our last of our 4 modules, which are aligned with the Cisco CyberOPS security certification, we're going to be looking at types of attacks, although not all of them, some types of attacks, and a little bit of a discussion, a very small discussion about vulnerabilities. And then at the very end of the session, or towards the end of the session, I'm going to do a demonstration using Kali Linux and a Metasploitable virtual machine. I'll explain a little bit about where you can get those and what they're used for a little bit later on. But if we get through the slides for a start, we'll be right up there with the demonstration. So, as I said, first cab off the rank is types of attacks. We'll talk about some of them, not all of them. Most commonly seen attacks, and the ones that are probably dwelt on the most in the CyberOps certification. Most of the time, attackers won't want to be discovered. There are different types of threat actors, as we've sort of alluded to at different stages within our 4 weeks. And those different threat actors have different motivations, different ideologies, different reasons for attacking. So sometimes we can have rather inexperienced attackers, otherwise derogatorily known as script kiddies. And they are often or can be people who are just trying to test their skills or show off or make a bit of a name for themselves. Now, in that case, they're not necessarily worried about trying to keep things quiet. They're rather overt about it. And on the other end of the spectrum, where you have state-sponsored threat agents, so attackers which are run by government agencies, they often don't care whether you can see them as well, because oftentimes there's not much you can actually do about them. But in between, we have a whole range of different sorts of motivations and threat actors, like hacktivists or criminals, for example, or commercial or business type intellectual property thieves, for example, that want to keep things quiet. So when they infiltrate your network, they find a vulnerability in a certain target in your network, they attack it, they gain access to it, and then the first thing they try to do is laterally move. So move on to another target within your network. So they've got multiple points of presence, if you like, within your infrastructure. And obviously then they do that because it makes it more difficult to get them out if you have to worry about trying to find them in multiple spots. Once they've done that, or initially they might try to escalate privileges and laterally move, or they may just try to laterally move and then escalate privileges. Either way works fine. But ultimately what they're trying to do is get a foothold inside your network as God mode, and then keep that quiet so they can remain in situ for as long as they can without being detected, and do whatever it is they want to do, whether that's steal information or create havoc in some other way. So they'll use many different techniques to try and remain hidden. Initially, they attempt to identify as many possible targets that relate to their own beliefs or ideas. Okay, so initially, when they're looking for a particular target, if they're a hacktivist, for example, they will be trying to find targets which go against their particular ideology and hacktivism, for example. Or if they're criminals, they might be looking for the biggest pay ticket, whatever that is. Whatever business that is, it delivers the most money. They may even be hired by, say, a business competitor of yours to hack into your network and steal information or design about a new product that you're going to release shortly, so that they can sell it to the competitor who may get the jump on you or may otherwise ruin your party, so to speak. And the targets that different threat actors will try to target is totally dependent on what their beliefs, ideas, needs, requirements are. So are they doing it for money? Are they doing it for ideology? Are they doing it to create some sort of political landscape or whatever? Once a target is identified, they then will try to establish what vulnerabilities exist. And so this is a process which in the security industry call it vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. So we scan our own networks for vulnerabilities in order to be able to determine what our weaknesses are in our security footprint. And then we try to remediate those vulnerabilities to reduce that vulnerability footprint, so it makes it more difficult for hackers to get into our systems. But from a attacker's perspective, they're using that vulnerability scanning as a method of reconnaissance, so identifying which targets they can attack more easily. And once they've done that, they then go and do a little bit of research on the vulnerabilities, and they will craft their attack methods to suit those particular vulnerabilities. And in the demo, we'll have a look at a couple of vulnerabilities which are now no longer common, thankfully. Well, they shouldn't be common because they're well known, but we're going to an attack on a compromised host just to give you an idea of the sorts of ways in which we can do that, or they can be done. One of the ways in which we can gather as either a good, on the good side, trying to find intelligence about the sorts of attacks that are going to be potentially launched against us, or as an attacker to find out information about prospective targets, is through using something like open source intelligence, or OSINT. And it's basically making use of publicly available information to analyze prospective targets, to see how easy they are to get to, and then to scan them, determine what vulnerabilities are there, if any, there always is, and then to try and determine how those vulnerabilities can be exploited. There is so much information available, and really all attackers need to do is join the dots. Now, attackers, as I said before, attackers will vary greatly in their experience and abilities. They will also vary greatly in their motivations, and they'll also vary greatly in the access to resources that they have to attack you. So some of them will have huge amounts of computing power to be able to attack you with, others won't. If they've got a lot of computing power and they've got a lot of knowledge, then joining these dots using this open source intelligence and surveillance methods is relatively easy, and they'll be able to find your weak spots and break them down relatively straightforwardly. That's not to say that we need to be frightened of it, because whether someone is going to attack us or not is related to the value or worth of the information that we hold and whether it's worth anything to anyone else. We'll talk about some of this a little bit when we get to things like ransomware. This particular link here, which is up on the Moodle web page for you under week 4, provides many examples of tools and methods that are available to begin hacking, if you like. Obviously, threat actors will use it, but a lot of cybersecurity professionals will use it as well to gain an understanding of the landscape from which they're going to be attacked from. As we always say, how better to beat your attacker than to actually understand them. You have to almost become your attacker to know how you have to defend against them. So reconnaissance attacks are where everything starts. It includes a discovery process that is used to find out information about potential attack targets. So we look very broad first, and we start to gradually narrow it down until we find a specific target that we like and seems to be within our capabilities to attack. These reconnaissance attacks will often include scans, port scanning, and we'll do some of that in the demo to give an idea of what that looks like. And basically the idea of that is to scan accessible IP addresses to determine what services or ports are running on those devices. There will certainly be, there might, if you're talking about the internet, there will definitely be lots of potential targets with web ports open. So port 80 TCP will be open, or port 443 TCP. But there might be a whole range of other ports which haven't been secured properly and shouldn't be in use, but they are anyway. They're left there because there's system defaults or because the systems have been configured by people that don't really understand security. So this reconnaissance is that first step that's taken to discover what is available. Now, reconnaissance can be passive or active, so we can just scan and see what's there. Or we can be a bit more active and we can start to prod. We can start to ask further questions. We can start to try and make connections to see how far we can get into getting onto that system. Passive reconnaissance can be carried out by anybody. You don't have to be an attacker. You might just be someone curious about an organization. You can start researching information about a potential victim's public records through social media sites, lots of other technical information such as DNS, their DNS records, who is, which will tell you who owns a domain and what the different information, administrative information about that domain is, for example. It will tell you about IP address ranges, public IP address ranges, internal IP address ranges. You can use this website, showdan.io, which you can get a subscription to, and basically it's an open source intelligence platform, which does a lot of scanning or compiles information from a lot of different scanning sources into basically a one-stop shop for attackers, and they make money from it. Of course, it's available to cybersecurity professionals. That's a reason for having it open. But of course, there's always going to be nefarious individuals that will also use it as well. We can also use tools such as these, some of these here, to research. There is literally hundreds and thousands of automated, manual, open source, paid variants of tools available on the internet through which you can do reconnaissance. And a lot of them are just valid networking tools that you would use inside an enterprise to actually maintain the health of your network. You can use that to also do this reconnaissance. In addition to that, we can do active reconnaissance by being a little bit more active with our scanners that we use and the operations that we use with them. So Burp Suite, for example, is one that we're going to have a quick look at tonight in the demonstration. But there's a number of others here. Nmap we're going to use in the demonstration. Kali Linux is another one that's not on the list. I'm going to use that in the demonstration as well. So that's a small list of port scanners. We then have a few more. And this again is just a fraction of the number of tools that are available out there in the real world. I'll just answer this question from Kusala. So DNS stands for Domain Name System. So it's a system on the internet that translates web addresses, if you like, so www.itmasters.edu.au into an IP address, which your computer then understands a bit more about and sends that off out to the internet. So DNS is Domain Name System. It helps we humans translate, or helps computers translate from human readable names into their own readable names. Okay. So next, whoops, what have I done here? There we go. Port scanning. Many different types of port scanning and many different types of network scanning techniques. The most common are these particular ones here. So a basic port scan, which is what I'm going to do in the demo, identifies a range of open ports that are active on a target device. TCP and UDP scans go a little step further in that they also try to determine whether the port that's open is actually going to respond in some fashion. So whether it's going to grant you a connection or whether it's going to tell you to go away. And it may do that because it's been configured on the end host to do it, or it may do it because there's a firewall or an IDS in front of it. There's a couple of ways that can happen. So depending on the output you get from that, you're going to understand what is able to be attacked potentially and what is not worth pursuing. A strobe scan is where we use that to find ports that the attacker already has an understanding of to how to attack. So if we're looking for a specific port, so say a web port, so HTTP port 80 TCP, if we have a specific attack in mind that we want to launch, we would use a strobe scan to scan as many target IP address ranges as we can until we find that port's open, and then drill down a little further to determine whether we can actually use the attack we're intending to use against that particular device. And then a stealth scan is used to try to perform scans that are undetectable. So we're on the quiet. We're really just being really careful the way we're scanning. So instead of trying to scan a port, open a connection, and then leave it open, we are just very quietly scanning it to see what's going on. Tim, I'll sort of will answer that question at the moment. So the question is, what impact is or has AI had on CyberOps attacks? Conversely, how critical will the use of AI be to repel attacks? It's a good question. AI at the moment, there is, so adversarial AI is one category of threat, or threat vector rather than a threat actor, a threat vector, so a way in which actors can attack you, that is on the rise. But remember that AI is still relatively, even though it's artificial intelligence, it's still relatively early on, really. It's going to get a heck of a lot better, a lot better. And AI is already used, artificial intelligence systems of a sort are already used to repel attacks. So if you think about something like, and I go back to it in CrowdStrike, for example, or Cisco, I should be talking about Cisco in this subject, in this short course. But Cisco also have a operations center that does the same thing. So they have AI-based tools that will take information from agents that is distributed to them by the customers that subscribe to their services, and they intelligently collate all that information. They use artificial intelligence to go through it and come up with potential problems that then real people, real experts will then go and look at. Probably in the long run, that will be more machine run than it is human run. But at the moment, there's still a lot of human interaction. So it will be on the rise for sure. But at the moment, I think it's still in relatively early stages from a tech perspective. And in order to be able to run those sort of attacks, you need to be have fairly sophisticated systems in the back end as well. So it's more likely to be done through state-sponsored agents or sophisticated criminal groups, in my opinion. All right, so social engineering. Social engineering attack the weakest link, the human users. Now, why are humans the weakest link? Well, it's because most humans, not everyone, but most humans that you come in contact with want to help. They're keen to help. And if you're a convincing social engineer, you will be able to convince them relatively easily that, you need some help, and, can you help me out in this way? And they might let you in somewhere they shouldn't. They might give you some information they shouldn't. They might let you access their computer when they shouldn't, all those sorts of things. I'll give you an example. A gentleman that I used to do some work with was at one stage in his career basically a professional social engineer, and he was quite young looking for his age, and his modus operandi would be that he would dress up in a ill-fitting suit, and he would carry a copy he would carry a plastic folder, and in that plastic folder he would have a resume and some job applications and a heap of other paperwork. And he would take a USB key with some malware on it, and he would go into companies that had hired him as a cybersecurity consultant, and he would go into the reception area, and he would pretend he'd splash some water over his face before he went in, so he looked like he was hot and bothered and sweating, and he would rush in and he would play the role of a person who was coming in for an interview, but they'd forgotten to print off their resume, and it's really urgent, and it's all really bad, and they get really upset. And he would ask the receptionist if they could print off the resume for him, and he would hand them the USB key. They would place it into their computer, print off the resume for him, hand it to him. Unbeknownst to them, they would have installed malware on that system that just gave this gentleman full access to their system from remote. And he would do that as a cybersecurity consultant to social engineer people as the first step in their vulnerability scanning, penetration testing type scenarios. So it's actually it can be really easy to do. And they don't need to get, social engineers don't need to get a whole lot of sophisticated information from you. It can be relatively straightforward. So they can use email, they can use face-to-face, they can use the phone, they can use text messaging, they can use misdirection of web pages, they can use pre-texting. There's lots of different ways in which you can be socially engineered. Common techniques include phishing, spear phishing, and whaling, which can be used over SMS, voice, or email, or iMessage, or some other social media, if you like. The difference between these three is that phishing is just an attack against anyone. We're just trying to send information. It's like the typical phishing emails where you send off an email, you say, I'm a Nigerian prince and I've got $1 million and I've got to get it out of the country. Can you help me? Blah, 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 blah. You know the story. Same idea. But you send it out to as many people as you can. If you send it out to 1 million people and only 1% respond, hey, you've done pretty well. Spear phishing is where you target specific individuals within an organization to get specific information from them. So you might target someone specifically to get their login details, for example, or get access to their calendar or access to their email. Whaling is when we're looking at high profile targets. So people like CEOs, CIOs, CTOs. So big head bosses within a company. If you get access to their accounts and their information, of course, you can send requests down the chain and no one's going to question it because it's coming from the boss. Farming using redirection. So farming is literally taking information from legitimate sources by redirecting websites. So we're redirecting you from a valid website to an invalid one that looks the same. So this often happens with phishing emails as well. So they'll send out an email. It'll direct you to click on a link. So they'll say, we're the Commonwealth Bank, click on this link. And you click on the link and it goes to a website which looks exactly like the Commonwealth Bank internet bank. I'm not picking on Commonwealth because this happens to all the banks, but it looks exactly like the Commonwealth Bank website, for example. And so you enter in your username and password and you hit enter. And in the background, those details are sent to the attacker and then they redirect you to the real website, pass on those credentials and you log in like nothing's happened. And you don't even know that your information's been stolen. Malvertising is where we send out malware basically through advertising. So we advertise something, people click on a link, download malware, it's on their computer, they're caught. And then pre-texting using conversation. So this is another thing where we go in and we start to talk to someone, we set a context, we start to get friendly, we get a little bit of basic information out of them, and then bang, we go for the big information that we really want. All really common social engineering techniques that have been proven to work time and time and time and time again, and will continue to work while people are always willing to help. And that's an unfortunate thing about this is that people are always willing to help, most people. The best way to protect against social engineering is awareness. So teaching your people what is good and what's bad and what they should be looking over. So farming. Okay, so Ben, farming is you're farming for information. Okay, so one of the ways you do it is through redirection. So you send out a link in an email, for example, that purports to be from the Commonwealth Bank. Someone clicks on it. It goes to a website that you've created that looks exactly like the Commonwealth Bank. You type in your details to log in, and then those details are then transmitted to the attacker who stores them, and then they pass them on to the legitimate site, and you just log in like you didn't even know that you weren't logging in. You don't even notice as a user, but your information has been stolen. So that farming is literally farming for that information. Prevent phishing, again, through security awareness training, and also obviously email phishing filtering systems. So a lot of phishers, a lot of email phishers are quite, well, should be really easy to spot. They use all sorts of weird language. Often they will always present a sense of urgency in an action. So they'll always want you to do something now, always very urgent, and they're always asking for significant help. And they're after, and often it can sometimes seem to come from people with more authority than yourself. The best way is through phishing systems, anti-phishing systems, and through security awareness, so that people are aware of what the structure of a phishing email will look like, and therefore how to detect it. Do I think AI will take over a lot of offensive security pen test jobs? Probably at some stage, but look, we've often worried about things like that. Technology is taking over people's jobs. There will be other jobs that will come about. I've been in IT industry long enough to know that jobs change all the time. So I'm doing jobs now that didn't exist when I first started 30 years ago. So yes, AI will probably take some of the load off from somewhere, but in the meantime, other jobs will come out. So it's about being agile with what you do. Malvertising, I explained that before. So malvertising is using advertisements in order to propagate malware. So you send out an advertisement, someone clicks on it, and bingo, they've got their malware out there. Any tool for phishing emails? Do you mean sending them or defending against them? Because there's lots of different tools for defending against them. Most of the good security vendors will have tools that you can integrate into antivirus and anti-phishing systems that will do that for you. All right, privilege escalation is then, once we've got into a system, this is the sorts of attacks that allows us to get higher levels of escalation. It is a type of attack, but it's also a type of vulnerability. So it's a process of getting a small level of access, whether you're authorized or not, and then achieving an even greater level through that initial access. So you get the initial access into the system, you get the foot in the door, and then you start to elevate above that. Privilege escalation can occur because of misconfigurations, because of lack of patching, so you've got bugs in your systems, or other vulnerabilities that are built, either configured or built into your applications or your operating systems. And this simply allows the attacker to gain a basic foothold into the system, and then allows them to then potentially spend a bit of time there and start to otherwise investigate the system and eventually find a way to elevate their privileges. What that results in is that any application that they run or any task that they run within a higher security context, and then the hacker can gain full access and control through those methods. Backdoors. Okay, so once they've gained access to a system, they'll usually want future access, and they don't always want to come back in the same way, because if they do, that might be something that over time or even soon you might actually notice if you've got appropriate monitoring, and you'll cover that hole up so that they can't get in. So they install backdoors so that they've got another way to get in later on if they need to. So they can do that through installing other applications, through coding or configuration. They can also be installed by sending someone a little bit of software which does it on your behalf. So sending them a phishing email, click on this link, blah, 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 go and download this software, have a look at this advertising. All of a sudden, you're downloading software in the background that you don't know, you're installing on your system, the attacker's now got a backdoor. They can also be implemented as a result of viruses or worms, or, as I said, malware. So you send them a link, say, click on this, have a look at this, this is really interesting. Or Facebook ad, for example, this is really interesting. People will click on it. In the background, they'll download the software, and then they're in trouble. We have buffer overflows and code execution. Now, buffer overflows and code execution often require access to the target system first. And the type of action will depend on the level of access the threat actor has or can achieve, and is based on the permissions that the account that was compromised by the attacker has initially. Now, buffer overflows often lead to that code execution. So if a threat actor has access to a system, they can write some code or implement some scripting, which they can execute, leave it in memory or leave it to run at boot time, which will do something, either provide them a backdoor, provide them with a back channel, secrete information out to their own FTP site, for example, or do something, whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. Buffer overflows are a way of overflowing the capabilities of a particular device. So that is, you might overrun the input buffers into the network interface card, or you might overrun the CPU buffer, or you might overrun memory buffers, all of which will then cause unexpected issues to happen in the background. That's all very simplified. There's a lot more to that, but for what we're talking about, that's all we need to go through. Of course, once you have a buffer overflow, like if you're talking about, say, something like a SQL server, a database server, you can do buffer overflow attacks on that. And then that can allow you to get access to the system further, and then you can start running scripting within that database to gain access to the database information. And so therefore, code execution can lead to problems with confidentiality, with integrity, and because of the buffer overflows, availability of the system or network as well. Let me just have a look at some questions here. What category would you put attack sites that have sponsored links on Google search, for example, ABN lookup for those who don't go direct to the government site? I guess they're malvertising, I guess, in some way. Or you could call them potentially unwanted PUP. You call them potentially unwanted programs, PUPs, or simply phishing. Simply phishing. I mean, they fit firmly into that category as well. Is APT a market hype term for a backdoor, or is there something more to the term? No, an advanced persistent threat is not specifically a backdoor. It actually more generally refers to state-sponsored agents or attackers of that ilk that are always trying to get access to systems. So if we talk about the Western world's always talking about the Russians and the Chinese hackers. Now, you'd be completely naive to think that the Western world doesn't have attackers going back the other way. Of course they do. So advanced persistent threats are basically state-sponsored agents who are always trying to attack someone somewhere. So that's any threat that is consistently happening is an advanced persistent threat, but generally we talk about them as being related to those state-sponsored agents. If an email attachment is scanned okay by McAfee, does this mean that it's safe to click open? Not necessarily, no. As with all viruses, if they're relatively new, and not all virus scanners are created equally, and they won't always pick up all sorts of attacks. So no, not always. And that applies not just to McAfee, to anything. And I'll just have a look at this question about social engineering. Recent years, social engineering techniques have evolved to become more sophisticated and targeted, often leveraging psychologically manipulation techniques. Can you discuss some advanced social engineering tactics that have emerged along with strategies for detecting and mitigating these highly deceptive attacks? I think I've pretty much covered as much as I want to with social engineering techniques. Basically, the idea is whether they're psychological or not, awareness is ultimately, so awareness, giving your users and workers and customers potentially awareness of what the possibilities are, what can happen, and the way they may be targeted. That's always generally going to be the best approach. All right, let's continue. So man in the middle. Man in the middle attack is simply when an attacker places themselves logically in line between two communicating parties. They intercept the communication and they do something with it. So they might just listen. So that's an attack against confidentiality. They may change the information in transit, which is an attack on integrity. Or they may try to block the connection from one end. So in this case, the man in the middle here might pretend to be this worldwide website and just talk directly to this person they're attacking. And so then this person that they're attacking now doesn't have access availability to the real website. They don't know it, but they've lost availability. And so this man in the middle, they can either just listen, they can stop the connection going through, they can change the connection, they can change something about it, they might record the conversation and replay it at a later date. They may, so if it's a financial transaction, for example, they might change the destination account number to their own. They might change some digits on the amount. They may copy it and then replay it again later on, so they double dip, so to speak. They can do lots of different ways, use lots of different ways. Once you're inserted inside and you've got access to that communication stream, there's many things that you can do. And this can be done at either layer 2 or layer 3, so either switching or routing. The main purpose, though, is just so that the attacker, the man in the middle, can see as much traffic as you want. Denial of service and distributed denial of service attacks have been around for many, many, many years. And their basic idea is to destroy availability. But there's certainly been heightened awareness about them over the past few years, or there's more attention paid to them in the mainstream media, I guess. And we can divide these denial of service attacks into 3 basic sort of categories. So we can call them direct denial of service, we can call them reflected, or we can have amplified or botnet type attacks. So what they look like here is in a direct denial of service attack, we have an attacker who simply tries, in this case, using TCP synchronization packets to try and overwhelm this web server victim. So their idea is to try to, so TCP, without going into huge amounts of details, because it's outside the scope of the topic we're talking about, but TCP uses what's called a 3-way handshake to establish a connection. And the first part of that is sending a synchronization packet to the target. The target will then send an acknowledgement that it received that packet, and it will send its own synchronization packet back to the receiver. That receiver will then acknowledge that synchronization packet, and the connection is thus established. Now, the way denial of service attacks work is that they will send a whole bunch of synchronization packets to which the web server will respond to with SYNAC packets, but the attacker then never responds to those. And so what happens is a web server gets inundated with all these half-open connections waiting for a response from the attacker, which is never going to come. And eventually it runs out of input buffers, or it runs out of memory, or it runs out of processing, and then it cannot process legitimate requests to connect, and therefore that website becomes unavailable. So it's a denial of service. In this particular type here, this is more like an amplified attack, potentially, or a distributed attack, where we have botnets which are controlled by an attacker using what's called a command and control server. So this attacker has access to a command and control server, and he takes over all of these random servers or desktops or people who are connected to the internet all over the world. So they just randomly look for target systems that they can infect and take control of, to then launch an attack from those onto who the real victim is. So in this case, this attacker, through the command and control system, takes access and control of all of these machines. Then once he's done that, he uses the command and control center to instruct these bots, collectively known as a botnet, to then send loads of traffic, maybe SYNAC, so maybe like the last denial of service we looked at, or maybe just sending lots of traffic to the web server of the victim. Eventually, this server is overwhelmed and it can no longer respond to any real requests, therefore, thus being denial of service. And then lastly, we can do it this way. This is a reflected attack, where the attacker will basically bounce off a source device to a web server victim, with the same idea of just overwhelming the web server so that it can no longer respond. It's the same idea, just using a different potential attack vector. Exactly the same idea. In all denial of services, the idea is to overwhelm the target so that it can no longer respond to legitimate requests. All right, before I go on to vulnerabilities, let's have a look at some of these questions. So, how do you protect your environment against attackers trying to exploit teams? That's a question I think that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about this evening. We're looking at general sort of information here. My advice is if you've got problems with teams, then I would certainly look towards your certified Microsoft provider for information about that. Is it important for training presentation on social engineering topics without handling security, intelligence, introduction, and basic ethics? I'm not sure what that's asking, but I think what you're saying is I think if I get your question right, you don't have to handle security, intelligence, introduction, and basic ethics to educate your users on social engineering. In general, with security awareness training, the more simple you keep it, then the better it's going to be, and keep it targeted to the context in which the users find themselves. So, for example, if they're using application A, or simplify it even more. Let's say they're using email, and that could be a potential vector for social engineering. Then tell them how they could potentially be socially engineered using phishing, spear phishing, or whaling, for example, via email. Tell them about the possibilities of, downloading a piece of nefarious software through a link that's been sent to you via email, which then will implement a backdoor or a virus. Give them some basic information about that. But you don't have to then talk to them about face-to-face social engineering if they're never going to meet anyone from the outside world in their role in a face-to-face way. Although, you can still do that after hours, obviously. So keep it within the context of their work role. Keep it as simple as possible is the best way to do that. Don't overcomplicate it. How do I identify if the quest or site visitors are legit or an incoming attack if DOS is launched by different bots? Various security systems will do that for you. So it'll be dependent on, with denial of service attacks, regardless of whether they're coming from multiple destinations or not, they all have the same sort of basic modus operandi. They will create, in a lot of cases, they'll create half-open connections. As soon as you see someone that's doing that, you can be relatively sure that they haven't got good intentions. But your monitoring and security systems will do this for you. It's not something that I would expect most people to use things like Wireshark, for example, so protocol analyzers to do that. It's probably beyond most of us to sit and do that. We've got many other things to do. Reflected DOS, I have explained that. We just went through that. So that is where an attacker will use they will attack a system and bounce their denial of service attack from that system to the real target. So to the real target, it looks like that attack is coming from another source, not the actual attacker. So they reflect it or bounce it through another system. All right, types of vulnerabilities. So this is just a basic discussion on vulnerabilities and some basic types. And then we'll have a look at through the demo some ways in which these vulnerabilities can be exploited. So a vulnerability is simply a weakness in the security around a system. And in order to be good cybersecurity professionals, we need to understand the weaknesses and vulnerabilities within our systems, because it gives us a big advantage then in being able to implement appropriate countermeasures to reduce the risk of those vulnerabilities being exposed to threats. Now, it could be that we can remove the vulnerability altogether if it requires something like a patch or an access control list, and that fixes the problem, then great. But often it doesn't. Often you can't get rid of the vulnerability completely. You can't reduce the risk completely. You may be able to minimize it, but you might not be able to get rid of it completely. And so it's really important that we understand these weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Now, they can come from lots of different places. they can come because of policy flaws. So in other words, you have implemented security policy which doesn't mandate strict enough controls. And so because you haven't mandated strict enough controls, you just don't implement controls that are strict enough, and therefore it leaves holes in your network that can potentially be broken. An example of that might be that you implement a password policy that allows you to put in 3-digit passwords that don't have to use anything other than capital letters. That's a ridiculous policy, and it opens up a massive vulnerability in the capabilities of an attacker being able to brute force your password, anyone's password on your system. There could be design errors. So you might have, for example, misplaced a firewall. So you think it's in a good spot to protect you, but it's actually not. And so incoming connections are not going through a firewall, and therefore they're going straight into your network, as an example. There might be protocol weaknesses. So weaknesses inherent inside HTTP, for example, or FTP or TCP or whatever protocols you're running on your network. They could be because the standards are quite old and they don't, you can't retrofit security mechanisms within those protocols. And so you have to provide other mitigations around them. Misconfigurations are a big one. Software flaws, so software bugs, for example. Human factors, which we've already talked about in our social engineering. Malicious software through the implementation of malware or viruses or worms, trojans, backdoors, as we've discussed. Hardware flaws, so this is literally faults built into hardware. So think of things like lights out or remote access to servers, for example, through network interface cards. If the hardware is not right, they can open up some problems there, or around BIOS or firmware on server-based systems, as a couple of examples. Or obviously, if someone can gain physical access to your system because of potential policy flaws or design errors or whatever, then if they've got physical access to your system, then that's about as good as it gets from an attacker's point of view. Now, with any types of vulnerabilities, they often don't exist in a singular form. They often exist together in multiple forms. So you'll often see these in combinations. The most common types of vulnerabilities include these. Some of them we're going to look at. We might have a look at a SQL injection one, but we're going to look at a couple of other vulnerabilities, which are thankfully no longer open, but these are just a few of the vulnerabilities that exist and that are covered in the CyberOPS exams. There's more detail in the CyberOPS syllabus, but just as a couple of examples, if we were to look at, say, a cross-site scripting vulnerability, so a vulnerability to cross-site scripting is a common one. So in this type of vulnerability, so this vulnerability targets web applications or websites, and the idea is that attackers will inject malicious scripts into a trusted website so that it will exist, well, in one form of the attack, it will exist on the website, it will be installed there, and when a unsuspecting customer or user comes along, they will then access that website either through a form or some other interaction, and they will then inherit that vulnerability, whatever it is, or that code that has been stored on that website, and it will begin to attack their system as well. So typically we use these, these are used in search fields to echo strings, or they'll be used in HTTP headers or input fields or hidden form fields. They'll return sort of nefarious error messages, and then either copy that sort of information or use it in an otherwise nefarious way. We could talk about vulnerabilities all night. This is a small list. There are many others, but let's move on to our demonstration using Kali and see what else we can actually see. So in this demonstration, I'm using 2 virtual machines running in OracleBox. The first one is Metasploitable version 2. Now it is a system that has been run up in a virtual machine. So you can download this. The link is on the Moodle site for you under week 4 topic. And it is deliberately enabled to have a lot of vulnerabilities in it so you can use it as a test system to attack and have a bit of a go at. Okay, so that's the first one I'm using. And we don't really need to even really look at that. It's just running in the background. But the system I'm going to be using to attack it is this, Kali Linux. This is also available as a virtual machine through a link that's up on Moodle for you, or alternatively, you can download it as an ISO and install it on a machine that you wish to use. I'll see there's a question here, which I'll answer at the moment. When you say vulnerabilities are not open anymore, does that mean that it's been closed, resolved permanently, and can't be exploited anymore by the attacker? Yes. So what I'm saying is that these vulnerabilities are well known. They have been, the software systems that they apply to have been patched and fixed, so they're not available anymore. However, they may be available if someone hasn't installed the correct version of the software or they haven't patched it appropriately. So all things equal, though, if you patch it appropriately, then these vulnerabilities will no longer exist. Oh, I've lost Macaulay from that. Sorry about that. Go back to there. So first thing I want to do is I'm going to do a port scan. So what I'm trying to do here is to identify some target services that I can potentially attack on the victim service. Now, I think, let me just check here. I think, I'm on 10.0.2.4, so my attack target should be 2.5. So if I run sudo, and you can see I've been doing it earlier with some other targets. And we run SP with some switches. Now, I'm not going to go through what all these switches mean with Nmap. Suffice to say, Nmap is a tool that allows you to run a scan against a target, and it will tell you what information is on that target. Okay, maybe that isn't my target. So let me go back to no, that's not what I want. Sorry, I'm going to go back to my Metasploitable. Bear with me for a second. No, it is 10.0.2.5. How silly of me. Oh, well, that's interesting, isn't it? Let me have a look at that again. No, it is. I scanned myself then. What an idiot. I just said that. I scanned myself. How silly of me. All right, so that's my Metasploitable. Just goes to show live demos can always go wrong. All right, so we're scanning the Metasploitable device to see what ports are open. Now, this can take some time. This will generally only take a minute or two. And at the end of it, here it is. You'll see what it provides us with is, and hopefully that's big enough for you to see. Yeah, okay. I think that should be big enough for you to see. It gives us a listing of all the ports that are currently open on this system. Now, what we're looking for is something that we can attack. And there's two on this system that we're going to attempt to attack. One is this VSFTP daemon, and the other is this Unreal IRC or Internet Relay Chat daemon. So we're going to have a look at both of those potential attacks against both of those. Not all of them, but a particular potential attack. Inside Kali, so that's a bit of an example of some port scanning. So we port scan, we now found these ports open on this particular target. We've now identified a couple of source ports that we want to attack, and we're going to have a look at how we can start to compromise those. So on Kali, we're just going to start a couple of systems. I'm going to start up an attack framework here, and you'll see, I'll just make sure, just see whether it's running. Okay. So we do need to do a little bit. I've got that. The database, we have to also initialize the database we're going to use. So we're going to use a Metasploitable attack console. So it's written by the same people that provide the Metasploitable database. And we're going to run, that's probably already is, it is started. We're going to run this console now. And this is actually the attack tool that we are going to use to attack our Metasploitable device. Again, this can take a little while to start. All right, the console now started up. And we can start to play around. So the first thing that we want to attack, we identified the FTP daemon, VS FTP daemon. So we're going to search in our attack database here. Oh, that's not right. That should be V, fat fingers. And it comes up and it says that we have two possible attack vectors. So we've got a FTP-based attack and we've got a backdoor. The ranking for the backdoor is excellent, as it says there. So that's the one we want to go for. Any attack which is ranked excellent, then we know that that's going to work within the context of the tool set that we're using. So we're going to use that exploit. So we're going to use exploit 1. We've got no, it tells us that we don't have any payload at the moment. We don't have any options. So let's have a look at the options that we need to set. Okay, so the options we need to set, we don't have to set a client address or port. We don't have to set a proxy, but we do have to set a remote host. So that's our target. So we do that by set hosts and then the address of the device we're attacking. Hopefully I don't set my own address again. And we'll go show options again. And now we can see that that's set. I don't think we have to set any payload for this one. No, we don't. So we should be able to just go run. And we can see now it says backdoor service has been spawned. It's found the shell. So now I'm actually connected to the Metasploitable device. So if I type uname.a, you'll see now that I'm on the Metasploitable server. So now I've gained backdoor access to that. If I go present working directory, you can see I'm in the root. If I say, who am I? It tells me I'm logged in as root. So now, which is God mode in Linux. So now I can see everything on that particular system. I have God level access. So now if I was an attacker, a legitimate attacker, I would try to laterally move onto another system within this network and then gain access to that and then launch subsequent attacks from that. Now, while I'm on here, I could create files, I could delete files, I could create scripts that would run in the background. I could download the password file, for example. So if I went into ECC and I did list, you'll see there's a shadow file. So if I go cat shadow, this shadow file shows all of the user accounts and the passwords that are assigned to those user accounts. Now I could copy that, go away, do a brute force attack on the password account on that shadow file until I got the passwords and then come back and log in as whoever I want, including any of these system accounts, and do whatever I want to this particular system. So now I have God level access. I'm pretty much home and hosed. I'm made. I can I go back a directory. Oh, sorry, wrong way. I can now, as I said, I can see anything. So I can change the boot up parameters of this device. I can change the IP addresses. I can delete accounts, create accounts, do whatever I really want to. It doesn't matter. I can do whatever I want. Okay, so that is one simple sort of attack / exploit. So I'm going to abort that session and we're going to quit and get all the way out. So I've now cleared that up. We're going to go back into MFS console and we're going to try an attack using a different attack using the other, what was the other thing we used? Oh, the IRC relay. That's right. So we've already done the scan. We already know that IRC relay is there. So we will now start to use that for the same sort of idea. So if we now search in our database for Unreal IRCD, that'll probably do it, but we better put in the version number as well, which I think was 3.2.8.1. Yep, there it is. So we can use exploit 0. With this one, we do have to set a payload, I think. So let me show payloads. Oh, we can't spell. Okay, we've got some payloads. So we're going to do payload 6. Yeah, we're going to do payload 6. So we're going to use 6. Oh, no, we can't do that. How do we do that? Set payload equals 6, is it? I can't remember. Oh, I can't remember how to do that. Let me think for a minute. Show payload. Oh, no, I think, no. I think it's just set. I don't think we have the equals, do we? There we go. No. So set payload to 6. We now want to have a look at the options because we'll have to set a target. We have to set the R host. So again, remote host is equal to 10.0.2.5. And if we go show options, now see we're ready to go. Right. So now we can potentially run that. I don't think we have to put in. Oh, no, we do have to put in the local host as well. So set L host 10.0.2.4, which is this end. There we go. Now we should be able to just run that. And again, now we have access to a shell. So if I go uname.a, we're back on Metasploitable. Present working directory, I'm in the Unreal directory, so I'm in the home directory for the Internet Relay chat. But if I say, who am I? I'm logged in as root. So now I'm in the same spot as I was before. And I can do whatever I want. Okay, so I can then use that as potentially as a reverse telnet to then gain access into something else. So we've got all of these different attacks that we can run. Did I use the right one? I did. So what I should be able to do now is if I open up another command window, I think we should be able to do this, and I go nmap 10.0.2.5. Oh, there it is there. Minus P 2600. Okay, that service is there. So if I go netcat, 10.0.2.5, 2600. Oh, no, that's not what I want to do. I want to telnet to it, you idiot. Telnet 10.0.2.5 on 21. Oh, we'll use this other one there. Oh, is that going to work? Or have I set it up? I can't remember which way I'd set it up. Oh, you idiot. I got fat fingers again. Somebody tell me. Right, okay. So this is another example. So this is now we're using VSFTP. So if I type in user, where's no, that one doesn't work for me. So I've done something wrong there. So this is another vulnerability I was trying to show you, but I must have messed it up. Done something wrong with it. Because this particular vulnerability, with this particular FTP server, if you log in using those credentials, oh, I know what I've done. If you log in using those credentials, it will open up a root console for you. So if we go telnet again, 10.0, 10.0.2.5, 21. I think we just need to type it like that. Oh no, we do have to do the user. User, or maybe I didn't do that. User, I can't remember. Anyway, and then I think that I have to type in pass. Maybe I do. No, okay, now see it's locked now. So I've killed it with the other one. So I should have typed you pass and password. So sorry about that. Anyway, the same thing happens. It opens up a root shell in the background. The last little thing I want to demo is a SQL injection. So we're going to use a thing called Burp Suite to do that. Now on our Metasploitable device, we have this front end, which allows us to launch a number of different attacks. So what we do is we need Burp Suite and we turn intercept on. And we go back to here and we click submit. And hopefully, did that? No, okay, right. Oh, yeah, there it is. It took a while to come up. So Burp Suite has now intercepted my communication with the SQL server, and it's given me this cookie. And if I copy that cookie, and I can turn that off because we don't care about that anymore. And I go back to my thing here. I can do SQL map, and there it is there. But we're going to replace that cookie with that, with the new cookie. And we're told, I don't think that changed actually. DBS. What I've now done is, because I've used that cookie, I've now connected to the SQL server and I've asked it to tell me what databases are on it. And now I can see all the databases that are on that particular server, because this SQL server has a vulnerability in it, deliberate vulnerability, mind you. So now I can do things like select the database. Let's DVWA. I can have a look at oh, I shouldn't have done that. No, oh, it's not giving it to me. I've obviously broken it when I was mucking around earlier on it. So what you would have seen is that it would show the databases. Oh, idiot. That's what I'm going to do. Sorry. Oh, dear. Tables. So what I'm saying is I'm going to, the first command was interrogating the database. This is now interrogating the specific database for the tables within that database. So now we have guest book and user tables in that database. If I now say, all right, let's have a look at the table users, and we have a look at the columns within that database, we can now see that we have user, avatar, first name, last name, password, and user ID within that table. And this is where I think it breaks down with my database. I think I've broken it. So if I type in user, what it should give me is a listing of all the users in the database, but I think I broke it earlier. I've broken it, killed it. So what that would do typically, if I hadn't broken it earlier, is it would show me a list of the users, and then I could do the same by typing, let's have a look at the column password. And again, it's broken, so it's not going to work, but it would show me the passwords associated with that database. So then I could then use those usernames and passwords to attack further. Okay, that's as much as I probably wanted to demo at this stage. Both the links to Kali Linux and Metasploitable are up on the Moodle website for you. So let's have a quick look at questions that we've got. And then that'll bring us to the end of our 4 weeks. So James has said, coming from another IT Masters course where the capture the flag exercise is part of the test, I didn't know if the Kali Metasploit VMs could be run on a work PC. Are these safe to use? Yes, they are. With these, with the proviso that when you set up the virtual machines, you set them up on their own private network. So my particular machines on this are set to be able to net overload on my interface card so they can connect to the internet. But I would advise if you're, when we use these at a couple of different unis that I work at, we will confine them to their own network logically within that device. So we just put them on their own private network and we don't let them out. Otherwise, you could get yourself into trouble for sure. So we've got how to do privilege escalation here when we get a normal user account. Well, you'd need to take a little bit of time exploring around that user account to find out other information that may potentially allow you to then escalate the privileges. Ideally, we would want to get when you first, if you got just a really basic low-level user account with no significant rights at all, it's quite difficult. But you need to accumulate knowledge of the internals of the system over a period of time, find out other information, maybe socially engineer someone, then you'll get some details in which you can actually use. So if you can get access to a root account from the start, that's always the best way to go. Will an attack be show recorded in account history or remain untraceable hidden? It is possible that it may show up in account history, absolutely, depending on the logging capabilities that have been considered on the system. If you are logged in at the same time as root admin as someone else is logged in as root, and you do something, it may also show up on their console, like it might also flash a message up on their console. So absolutely, it could potentially be traced. But it would depend on how their system has been configured for monitoring and how careful you are with what you run. A lot of the commands I was running there wouldn't really bring up any sort of messaging that would be significant. If you try to do a shutdown, for example, or delete files, then it might, or to write a script and then run it, launch it into memory, then it may actually do that. So, but again, if you're clever the way you do that and perform tasks which seem legitimate, then you can probably get away with it. And often these sort of attacks will happen in the dead of night when no one's actually watching or no one's monitoring. Or well, systems might be monitoring, but no one's there to catch it, so to speak, unless they've got something like CrowdStrike, for example, installed, in which case they pay someone else to do that on their behalf. I've been trying to practice with God mode and Nmap. Can I explain it more? Probably not the time and place to do it now, but I can put some resources up for you around how to use Nmap in its different variations, in different way. The way I scan it was just a basic scan, but there's a lot of other scans you can do with it as well. So I'll put a resource up for you to have a look at that under week 4 on the Moodle site. Best practices for using Kali Linux responsibly. There's no real best practices for it. Kali Linux is a toolkit that you can either use nefariously or you can use in a good way. The good way to use it is to simply understand that if you are going to use it, you don't use it in a destructive fashion. As cybersecurity professionals, our main focus on penetration testing and vulnerability scanning is not to do damage. So we would do basically what I was doing then. So you would scan for a vulnerability, you'd find it, you'd connect to it, run a few commands. Can I get in as God mode? Yes, I can. Run a few commands. Great. Take that as evidence, write it all down, present that to your client as a problem in the network and give them some remediations on how they could fix it. So for example, in these examples, patch those to that IRC or the other daemon that we're using, whatever it was, I can't remember what it was now, FTP daemon, in order to be able to prevent those vulnerabilities from being run. But you're not going to try and do damage. So you might be able to copy files, that's okay, but you wouldn't go through the process of shutting down systems or deleting vast slabs of information or putting viruses or those sort of things on it. The basic end goal is if you can prove that you can get God mode to a system, that's really as far as you need to go. Because once you've got God mode to a system, you can do whatever you like. So if you can prove to a customer through vulnerability scanning and penetration testing that you can gain access from an external point to a God level account on their system, that's usually as far as you need to go. You don't need to go any further than that. Is there such a thing as a GUI hacking to a platform? That's exactly what Kali is. With preloaded scripts, or you just need to put no copy paste scripts. No, you can. There, I'm not going to tell you where they are. You can search them for yourself. It wouldn't be responsible of me to tell you how to hack things explicitly, but there are many code repositories available on the internet where you can download predefined scripts that will for a certain purpose. And all you really need to do is tell them to look at a certain target and run those scripts. With Kali Linux, there are scripts on this. There are tools that you can use on this. There are a lot of tools. You can see there's lots of different tools here, including social engineering tools. So there's lots of different tools here that we could potentially use, and some of them don't require scripting like I did. Some of them will just run scans for you and give you output. As simple as that. There's also a thing called Greenbone Security Analyzer, or whatever that was, or Snort, variants of Snort, that will also allow you to do things like this as well. But there's lots of Kali Linux is the one I use, and in my opinion, it's one of the best. But there are lots of other tools as well. As a red team, you want to remove traces. What would you suggest? I would suggest if I'm doing it in a good sense, my suggestion is to document everything you do, keep a track of everything you do as you go in, and simply reverse them on the way out. It's as simple as that, really. And if you're going to perform actions that are irreparable, then there's not a lot you can do to cover your tracks there, other than looking at log files, deleting entries from log files and those sort of things, but you're not going to be able to reverse the damage that you've done. Okay, so from my point of view, that really brings us to the conclusion of our, not only our demonstration, but of our 4-week course. So thank you for taking the time to come along to our evenings and make the most of it. Thank you for your interaction and engagement. And thank you for your questions on the nights. I'm aware that many people have engaged on the forum posts. There's been a lot of good discussions there on the website. And obviously there's been some good engagement with the weekly quizzes as well. So the weekly quiz for this week will open tonight, later on tonight. And then the final test, final exam from which you get your certificate, if you pass that exam, will open at the end of this week. And that's 40 or later in the week. So this is, it's 40 questions, 40 multiple choice questions. Some of them will be familiar to you from the weekly quizzes, but there are others that are completely new, but they cover the same topics. And you need to get 20 out of 40 to pass. If you do that, then you'll have completed the course successfully, and you'll get your certificate at a later time, somewhere down the track. I might even pass that back to Shane to potentially answer questions about that if that's appropriate. But for me, that's all I want to talk to you. So again, thank you to everyone who's attended. Thank you to Shane and Jack and Lily, who have taken times out of their own schedules to assist me in delivering this course. I hope everyone found it enjoyable. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope it gave you a little bit of insight into the world of CyberOps. If you want to, you can continue on with your education and maybe get the Cisco CyberOps certification. But in order to do that, you will need to get some more practice and some more knowledge from the Cisco CyberOps certification guide, which of course we have used as the basis for these first 4 modules. So with all that said, thank you very much. Hand back to Shane if you have anything to further to add, but otherwise it's a good night from me.
Not much really, but to say thank you to you, Matt. It's been fantastic having you once again teach tonight, and for the last 4 weeks. It's been a really interesting and informative course, and I've been watching the chat all night because I haven't really had much else to do here. So on top of everything, there's been some great chat and fantastic interactions between everybody as well. I see a few questions coming past for people that want to know more. They can look at our website. They can fill in an eligibility form to see if they're able to do a postgraduate course, or they can ring and talk to one of our course advisors, or email in and we can email them back all sorts of information, or give them a call at their convenience. So all of those things we're more than happy to do. And you may also want to do more of the short courses. There's nearly 50 something, I think, available at the moment. We are doing about 6 new ones a year. A number of them, like this one, are refreshers of older courses. And the good thing about that is if you do 3 of our courses and get the certificates, we will give you a credit of 1 subject towards a degree or a graduate certificate. So there are lots of different ways of doing the courses and maximizing your study time and minimizing your costs. I'd like to finish up by saying thank you to everybody for coming along, and a big thank you particularly for Lily, who's been here every week. Jack and I have swapped back and forth a little bit. Jack is our usual host. I'm the B side, if you like, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in about 3 or 4 weeks. We're doing a course on preparation for university study, which replaces an old version of that, and we'll go into a lot of the information you'll need to know about what happens in postgraduate study, referencing, Turnitin, all sorts of stuff around that. That's only a 2-week course, but it will be very informative, and our CEO, Chantel Hale, will be taking that. So thanks once again. And for tonight, I think we will say a good night.